Today's Warhammer The Old World battle report is what I consider to be one of the most classic matchups in fantasy. The Vampire Counts versus the Bretonnians. Both are bringing 1,500 points and fighting in a custom scenario, Defend the Grail Chapel. I'm going to put some timestamps up now for everyone and go over the scenario first. The Vampire Counts wish to corrupt the grounds of the Grail Chapel. Just outside of there is a rather sizable graveyard that could prove very effective in amassing fresh troops for whatever war campaigns they wish to conduct in this area. The Bretonnians, not wishing to let the Vampire Counts get such a foothold within their own territory, have amassed something of a quick defense, local men-at-arms and bowmen, not really too much in terms of cavalry to defend the area. However, the Lord has been signaled as to what's going on, and it won't be too long before him and his Grail Knights arrive, ready for the fight. Additionally, the Vampire Counts are in a similar situation where they saw this opportunity of the Grail Chapel defenses being rather light, and they sprung an attack with most of their freshly conjured troops. Their actual elite troops, such as the Black Knights and the actual Vampire Lord, were conducting raids in a nearby area. And it will be a little bit of time before they're able to arrive to the battlefield as well. So both the armies kind of have their core troops matching up against each other, and their heavy, hard hitters arriving a little bit later to the battle. So this is going to be an attack and defend scenario. Ideally, the defenders should be a Forces of Order player if it's possible. If not, it's all good. You can change the Grail Chapel to some kind of Chaos War Altar or whatever you feel is appropriate. But I'm going to just be kind of sticking to what I use for terminology. But you'll see just even the way I wrote the rules here, a lot of this stuff is pretty interchangeable for whatever is appropriate for the matchup of the armies on the table. We're going to be using the open battle deployment system, but whoever is going to be the defending player, they're going to pick one of their corners, and that corner is going to be where the Grail Chapel is set up. Their opposite table corner is going to be their reinforcement staging area, and I'll be going into what that is soon enough. The opposing player, the attacker, is going to go to the short table side that is closest to where the Grail Chapel is, and you're going to mark their reinforcement staging area at the halfway point of that table side. I'm going to put up some visuals right here on the screen here to just kind of clarify what I'm talking about. I know it probably sounds a little confusing, but these are going to be the areas where your troops are going to be coming in later on the battlefield. Both players have to set aside a minimum of 500 to a maximum of 1,000 points of reinforcements that will be coming in on those areas. Again, I'll go into the mechanics a little bit later. Additionally, the attacker is going to need a payload objective. And again, a lot of these terms are pretty interchangeable, but the payload is basically like a sabotage wagon, like a little wagon filled with explosives that you're trying to wheel over to the Grail Chapel and unload all the explosives around the area to destroy it. Or it could just be like a wagon that you're using to stow all of the loot that you can get out of the Grail Chapel. Whatever you want, but it just kind of needs to represent this usage. I'm using a undead black coach just because it's the model that I had available at the time, but ideally just whatever kind of basic chariot your faction has available, or like some kind of ally faction if yours doesn't have one available, could maybe be used. I'm sure people can be creative in figuring this out. The biggest thing is this does not count towards the attacker's list construction. It's like purely like a bonus thing they're going to get. And it's a non-combatant, meaning you can't charge, you can't shoot, cast, even if you have a special rule saying like Frenzy, you need to charge. You are going to ignore it entirely. This is purely like an objective piece that's trying to be protected and get towards the Grail Chapel, unload the payload, either sabotage the place, loot the place, whatever. And it needs to do that at the very end of the turn and stay alive in order to do that. It is allowed to fight back in a melee. That's the only exception to that rule. So if the payload is able to stay alive at the very final turn of the game, and is within 8 inches of the Grail Chapel. It is considered successfully sabotaged, looted, destroyed, whatever terminology you prefer, for the attacker. And the attacker will receive, I believe, 600 extra victory points. And if it's destroyed before then, the defender will receive 300 victory points. And these are all in addition to standard other objectives that might occur, capturing enemy banners, slaying enemy generals, or if your unit happens to have some other victory point condition that's tied to it. Those will all still be applicable. The final special mechanic for this scenario is your reinforcements from far away that have been called to arms for this battle at the Grail Chapel will come in at the very end of turn 3 or the very, very start of turn 4, as in before any of the command sub-phase shenanigans occur, okay? Now, these troops that come in can do whatever they want at the start of turn 4. They do not come in and get treated as if they were a reserve or an ambusher. None of that stuff. It's as if they were a standard unit that was already on the table and they're just starting a new turn. All right. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anything, because I want to say the final mechanic is that this game is going to last until turn 7. The defenders are going to have to last a couple of extra turns if they want to survive this battle. The first list we will go over is the Knights of the Blood Moon, a 1500 point list that some people on the channel might be familiar with. Trying to run the spirit of my old 6th edition vampire count list in the old world here, but I've had to make some compromises, as I'm sure you can tell, in the form of Malachi, the fabulous necromancer, and his beloved zombie mobs, kind of intermingling with my blood dragon army here. So what we got here is Cayman the Vampire Count riding his dragon. He's got a Crown of the Damned. Actually, it's a very fancy bedazzled crown of the Damned, I should say. He's also a Dark Alkaloid, and yeah, he's just got Lance Shield, Heavy Armor, so that's about it for his loadout. Malachi is actually leading this whole operation. He's a level 2 Necromancer. I have Baladesh the Condemned just to make my Black Knight's core and fill out the requirements and stuff. Also, he's just like a little bit of extra punch for the unit. He's not going to be a BSB just because I didn't feel like putting the points into it, but I honestly might have wanted to do that, but we'll discuss it later on. 2 zombie mobs, a little ghoul screen, as well as a hunting hound screen of dire wolves. I have a banshee, and then, yeah, the main points are going into that big unit of Black Knights there. Or, I should say, the Crimson Knights, who are ready to ride and seek vengeance on these Bretonnian fools. And because we're required to take a couple of troops aside for the reserve rules for the scenario, I will be setting aside the Vampire Count and the Black Knights. I figured have my hard hitters surprise the enemy later on in the battle and maybe skip a couple of turns of getting shot at. Moving on to the Defenders of the Grail Chapel. We've got a Bretonnian Duke that is pretty dang kitted out on a Hippogriff, some Foot Knights, Man-at-Arms, Bowmen, a Trebuchet, and some all-important Grail Knights. I believe the Grail Knights and the Hippogriff Lord are going to get put aside. Oh, I also should have mentioned he has a Paladin BSB and a level 2 Damsel. They're both going to be inside of that Foot Knight unit for this battle, I believe. And a Sergeant-at-Arms with the Man-at-Arms. And yeah, what I was thinking. The Bretonnians will be setting aside their Grail Knights and the Duke for the reinforcement part of the rules. I'm going to just put a couple of little objective markers and key notes up right now for anyone that missed it earlier. And after that, I think we are all set to move on to the actual battle report, folks. 1,500 points of vampire counts versus 1,500 points of Bretonnians. And those Bretonnians are trying their best to defend a Grail Chapel. Will the undead be able to corrupt the grounds and raise a new army of unholy undead troops? Or will the light of the Holy Lady of the Lake shine bright on this day and repel the foul forces of evil? We'll have to find out. So the start of the game is going to be the undead player having to slog across this board for about 3 turns and take constant barrage fire from the Bretonnians. They're defensively set up around that chapel. The Bretonnian player has longbows, which are range 30, and the trebuchet, which can just pretty much hit anything on this board. Vampire counts don't have any range, so the only thing they can really do is magic at these early stages to affect the battle. The Necromancer didn't really roll the best spells in the world. Most of them are short range, like 18. Raise Dead is the only one in these early turns that's really going to have any effect on the battle. And most of the zombies being conjured up with that spell are going to be placed around the center of the battlefield. I will mark it here on the screen. So the undead continue their slog up. The Bretonnian player took fire arrows on their longbows, which will negate some of the flammable regeneration saves that the undead units have now. So that's a little bit of a devastating effect, you could say, on their ranks. I'll put some pictures up here to show you what the initial casualty pools were looking like. Trebuchet got a couple of direct hits early on in this game on that main zombie mob that's in front of the black coach, and the longbows focused their fire there as well. The Bretonnian player is out of range, I believe, on the first turn when it comes to casting the Curse of Arrow Attraction. But I believe on turn 2 or turn 3, it's going to be getting casted pretty consistently and resulting in a good amount of rerolls for those longbows. Also in regards to the Bretonnian magic phase, early on in the battle, the Foot Knights are going to get the Lady's Wrath spell. I've mentioned this in a couple of my other battle reports. Pretty good spell. +1 strength and +1 AP to the unit's weapons. And the damsel's attached inside of that unit, so she gives it to the entire unit. Very, very nice buff. It remains in play. Goes off on a 9+ as well. So where we both have level 2 wizards here, that's not the easiest thing in the world to de-spell. And it's pretty much going to be remaining on that unit for the duration of this battle. As I already mentioned, the undead don't really have much in terms of range here. So these first 3 turns really are just them slogging it across the board here. They do manage to get a big enough screen of zombies in front of the main block here that do count as skirmishers, that it was a little bit questionable as I was trying to draw a line of sight through the unit if I actually could do that or not. According to the rulebook, skirmishers actually do block line of sight, so as strange as it sounds, like the Bretonnian player does actually need to focus shots down on the skirmishing zombies in the front. But the Curse of Arrow Attraction will help with that, and all that's going to be left after that volley of arrow fire is 2 zombies, but those 2 zombies are actually going to be quite a thorn in the Bretonnian side later on in this battle. Also, a tragic miscalculation occurs across the battlefield. As the trebuchet calculates its next shot, a misfire result is rolled, and it's a 1 on the chart. The trebuchet has collapsed in on itself and is removed from the table. Now, not much action has happened other than the trebuchet misfiring, a couple of zombies getting shot down in volleys of arrow fire, and a couple of magical buff spells being cast across the Bretonnian battle line. Really, it's just been a lot of movement and shooting. But what I will say is, at the end of turn 3, the undead have positioned themselves for the main battle clash. Everything is kind of just lined up perfectly. It's like the calm before the storm. And you can tell turn 4 is going to be a bloody one. And it's not just because all these troops are lined up. But for those of you that were watching my earlier segment about explaining how the scenario works, this is the turn where all of the reinforcements arrive to the battlefield. And that is only going to add to the chaos of this storm that is about to unfold here. So, I've got a lot to cover here now. Turn 4 really is a big one. And it starts with the vampire counts. So I'm going to put a little diagram up here explaining his positioning and what some of the units are going to be up to. Obviously, I'm going to be going over it verbally, but just reinforcing some of the stuff I'm going to be covering here. But to start with the far right side here, The vampire is going to charge into my peasant block, and I know you're thinking that graveyard might kind of block the charge wheel from happening. He can do a glide charge right over that, no problem. The dire wolves want to charge the same unit, and the zombies want to charge the foot knights that are to the left of my man-at-arm unit there. The problem is that if basically when all the units get squeezed in, the dire wolves are going to have to make a combined charge on the foot knights, and the zombies are actually just going to fail the charge. So it's going to be like one, yep, you can see in the photo there, like 1 or 2 dire wolves on the foot knights, the rest on the man-at-arms unit. Zombies coming up a little bit short, unfortunately. And the rest of the undead line pretty much just moving up here. Banshee is going to be in a prime position, or I should say was positioned in the prior turn in a prime position to do a Banshee Scream at my Grail Knights or my Duke if the vampires are feeling extra ballsy. Unfortunately, the Necromancer couldn't get many spells cast this turn. I know Raise Dead was blocked. Spirit Leech, I believe is what the spell is called, that does a -2 leadership. That was cast on my Foot Knights, I want to say, this turn, or it'll be the turn after. For whatever reason, that was like the only spell that was able to be cast. The Bretonnians were just doing a really good job at countering all the magic. But we're equal wizard level, so I guess I can't expect too much. Invocation might have been cast a couple of times, but I want to say they rolled pretty poorly on that as well. I know once or twice it was able to be cast early on in the battle. A decent amount of the zombies that were getting shot at were getting healed, but as you can tell by the picture, their numbers were reduced overall by the time combat started. The Banshee Scream rolls a 10, I want to say. And the Grail Knights only have a leadership of 9, so one of those sneaks right through, and the Lady of the Lake was not protecting that Grail Knight, so one is sniped off by the Banshee Scream. However, I'd be a little concerned if I was that Banshee, considering that unit is staring right at her, and they probably are going to charge next turn, and they all have magical attacks, so I don't think she's too long for this world either. Moving on to the big close combat here, the vampire and the dire wolves fighting the man-at-arms. It's pretty much a slaughter, if I'm being honest. The vampire destroys, I think, like 8 of the man-at-arms, and the wolves are able to kill a pair or 2 more. The man-at-arms are able to retaliate and get 1 or 2 wounds on the hounds, but it's really the Foot Knights that are also locked in combat that pretty much demolish most of the direwolf unit. I think only 1 remains. Now, this was an interesting situation, and from what I read in the book, this does count as a combined combat. So it actually was a victory for the undead player. However, neither side was completely broken morale-wise. I believe the Bretonnian line just gives a little bit of ground, and everyone continues their pursuit for a round 2 of close combat. Start of the Bretonnian player's turn now. The Grail Knights charge right into the Banshee, and I'm sure that's going to be a swift combat for them. I think the Foot Knights are unfortunately still locked in combat with one of those dire wolves, so they are unable to charge the impending zombie horde that's closing in on them. Pretty much, I think it's just a bunch of shooting from the archers and the Bretonnian Lord, or should I say Duke, flying over the main zombie line and positioning himself to threaten a ton of units. But I would say the one of highest interest is that Black Coach objective, which is only a few inches away from him. Additionally, the undead line is so close and it's kind of tightly packed there that it's debatable if those Black Knights are going to be able to squeeze through there. The zombies are going to have to kind of scurry away and get some really good charges if there's going to be enough space. The vampire and his dragon continue to chew away at this man-at-arm unit. As you can see from the photo here, at the end of round 2 of their combat, there is only 3 man-at-arms and the sergeant-at-arms remaining. And I don't know if it was this turn or the following turn. It looks like it happened this turn. The vampire basically just targets the sergeant-at-arms, Old O'Connell, and obliterates him in one swift strike. There's not much left in that unit. I think only 3 of them remain. They somehow continue to only give ground because of their layers of special rules, but I think the next round of combat will be their end. the Grail Knights obliterated the Banshee and overran straight into the ghouls. I believe that's the conclusion of this turn. Start of the following turn, the vampire player manages to get a couple of lucky charges off. There's the obvious charge of the zombie horde on the Foot Knights. That was close enough, no need for a difficult roll there. What was a difficult roll is the other unit of zombies closing the gap between them and my bowmen. It was the max distance, I think about 10 inches, and they managed to get the roll. In addition to that, he had those two pesky zombies that were conjured up still on the battlefield, and they were really close to my peasant archers. So close that I wasn't able to do a stand and shoot attack. And unfortunately, yeah, they managed to charge first, and then I'm unable to stand and shoot at the big horde as they charge afterwards. So, not the best situation. However, I will say that quote-unquote big horde of zombies that was able to close that gap has been reduced pretty significantly by all the range fire they took going across the board. I think they're down to about 7 or 8 zombies at this point. So it's actually a pretty doable combat for the archers, I would say. Also, the Black Knights roll a 6 and a 5 for their charge on the Bretonnian Duke. And what I mean by that is the first 2d6s that they rolled, they got a 6 on. And then the other one, for the Swift Stride, they got a 5. I think the charge total came out to like 16 or 17 inches. Their mounts have 7-inch base. So, again, just doing some quick math here. I think the max that they can get is 9 from the dice rolls. I could be wrong on that. But yeah, basically they were able to close that gap. I think it was about 15 or 16 inches. Like, they really needed a high roll on that. And that's a dicey combat. I think the Bretonnian Duke, though, has the countercharge rule. So that definitely helps, but I don't know. That's a lot of Black Knights. I don't really like his odds. And I've also heard that's not actually a typical unit of Black Knights. Those are the Crimson Knights of the Blood Moon, a very elite unit. But we'll have to see how they do in the old world. I mentioned there was only one spell the Vampire Count was really able to cast for the remainder of this battle here. And this was the turn that they rolled double 6s on casting Spirit Leech on my unit of Foot Knights. I will say, the Foot Knights are a pretty tough unit. I don't really like the odds of the zombies being able to break them. But we have some pretty close to proper line hammer going on here, where the zombies are 15 wide. So you never know what could happen there. Plus, they did get the charge, so you know. Little extra momentum for those zombie boys. That's it for magic. Close combats for this turn. The ghouls managed to surprisingly kill one of the Grail Knights. However, they also kill 5 or 6 of the ghouls, and I think the remainder of them just crumble from combat resolution. This is a good thing. They're going to do a reform afterwards, and they're going to be able to support their Bretonnian Duke, who's stuck in combat with the Black Knights nearby. That'll definitely be a lifesaver for him. The vampire devours the remainder of the man-at-arms unit. Probably not to anyone's surprise. He's going to reposition himself after that combat and be facing right towards the flank of the Foot Knights, who are currently locked in combat with a giant zombie horde, so that's not a pretty situation for them. Speaking of which, that combat is a little bit on the uneventful side. I guess those Foot Knights really exerted all their energy fighting off the dire wolves. They only managed to kill 2 or 3 of the zombies. They don't take any casualties, though, so I think the undead lose a couple to the crumble, and yeah, they're going to be continuing to slog away at each other for a good while. What is surprising is the archers managed to finish off all the zombies in that close combat, and I don't think they lose a single man, so some underdogs over there. The big combat for this turn, the Duke versus the Black Knights. Now, I initially said I would have been a little bit nervous if I was that Duke. However, it doesn't really go too bad for him. He kills 3 of the Black Knights. I think the Hippogriff kills 1 of them, and the Duke himself kills 2. The Black Knights only have a weapon skill of 3, which means they're hitting this guy on 5s. And because of the bedazzled helm that he's also wearing, they're hitting on 6s, which is not the best situation, actually, for them. And unfortunately, they don't deal any wounds in return, and I think they might even lose a guy to, like, crumbling afterwards. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, not the best situation. And as I already mentioned, those Grail Knights are in a prime position to help support their lord at the start of the Bretonnian turn coming up here. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to charge in there, and perhaps the odds were already even though I didn't suspect that, but I have a feeling those Grail Knights charging in are only going to sway it entirely in the Bretonnians' favor. Alright, think from the picture here, too. I might as well just go into it now, since it's already a little spoiled. The Grail Knights and the Bretonnian Lord are going to chip down these Black Knights to, I think, 2, maybe 3 guys remaining. However, they do actually get a considerable amount of wounds on the Grail Knights, who they focus their attacks on, and I think 1 or 2 of them might have even been cleaving blows. And again, the Lady of the Lake just was not there for those ward saves that they needed most. So yeah, I think 4 Black Knights go down and 2 Grail Knights in return. But again, it's a combat in favor of the Bretonnians, and I think the unit's going to continue to crumble, as you can see from the photo here. Something else eventful during the Bretonnians' turn, or I should say hilarious, is the archers decide to do a reposition and spin around and take a big volley of arrow fire at that vampire count. No wounds dealt at all. He just shrugged them all off, no problem. The only other eventful combat during this Bretonnian player's turn is the zombie horde against the Foot Knights. If I didn't mention it already, they're using the hand weapon shield loadout for this battle. There is a Paladin BSB in that unit as well, and they do have their Lady's Wrath buff spell. Despite all these advantages, somehow they've just fully exerted themselves fighting those wolves early on, because I think they only killed 2, maybe 3 zombies. Yeah, I think it was 3 zombies, because they only got a lead of 1, and they lose 2 of their guys in this combat. Pathetic. I mean, they do have the BSB and an extra rank or 2 on these zombies, so the crumbling will still give them a little bit more of a numbers lead over time, but still, their attack output has just not been performing to what I've seen in other battles, this game at least. I don't know what the deal is. Start of the Vampire Count's turn. He's gonna charge that zombie dragon lord into the fucking Foot Knights. Big surprise there. We're gonna have to test their defenses at this time and see if they can hold strong, because now their odds are not looking good. Neither of us have too many things at play right now, and I do want to make a note that it was either on this turn or the following turn that the Vampire Counts were able to get that black coach within 8 inches of the chapel. It was quite literally on, like, turn 6 or turn 7 that the objective got within range. It was that close to the timing. Yeah, I probably could have moved it up a little bit faster, but I don't know. I liked the sense of drama that there was and the timing there of it just arriving before the battle was going to end. I think this actually was the last turn here, and I remember I was playing the Vampire Counts in this game. Sorry if I get that a little confused. I'll talk about that afterwards. Long story short, it's because I'm narrating like both of my armies fighting against each other here, and I've never really done that before. And also, just I helped make the list for the Bretonnian players, so it felt a little bit more attached to it than usual, you could say. But yeah, this was like the final turn and I was the vampires, and it wasn't really role-playing per se, but I was saying that vampire over there came in on his dragon. He's feeling quite arrogant at this point. He's got the black coach within range. The Foot Knights are all locked up. He's got them in a perfect jam, and those Black Knights are keeping the Bretonnian Lord and the Grail Knights tied up just long enough that they might not be able to reach that objective. And he was giving quite a few arrogant speeches and gloating across the battlefield, calling out that Bretonnian Duke for being a coward. And it was all in good fun, though. Anyways, and I might have spoke too soon, you could say, because it was my turn at this time, and things did not go as well as I was expecting when it came to the close combat phase. My vampire, after all that gloating, choked up when I really needed him to kind of come in most here. I rolled all of his attacks, and I think one went through. And then I rolled all the dragon's attacks, and I think one went through. And then I did the Thunderstomp, and I think one went through. And the Bretonnian player passed, I think, one or two of his armor saves, if he even had them. But I don't know. I think he just honestly passed all Lady of the Lake saves there. She blessed that unit when they needed it most. And yeah, I think my vampire dealt all but like one wound. I think the Thunderstomp actually got one wound through. And I was quite disappointed in Cayman after all of that trash talking. How could you do this to me? Damn it, man! And I think my zombies choked up as well. Maybe they got one wound through. I think I killed 1 to 2 foot knights in this combat somehow. Now, the good news is they also continue to choke up. The guys on the flank deal no wounds to the vampire, and I think they kill maybe 1 zombie. So really pretty much negligible crumble results from that, but this was the final turn and I really needed to break that unit just to like claim my victory in this battle here. The Bretonnian player is also going to wipe out the Black Knights this turn, and even though it wasn't the first round and they can't overrun or anything, they are now set up to get a long bomb charge on the Black Coach and possibly end the game on the final turn here for the undead. Oh, to rub extra salt in the wound of my vampire counts here, they lost that combat and had to give ground, I think, like an inch or two. So now that was their final turn in this game, the Bretonnian player is going to just completely ignore the vampire and just charge right into the zombies and give a little mocking blow to my vampire with those archers shooting another volley at him, and of course they managed to sneak 1 wound in. Not really a big deal or anything, just something funny that happened at the end here. The big news is the Bretonnian Duke and the last remaining Grail Knight managed to close the gap with the Black Coach, get really nice charge rolls. It only has 4 wounds now. Yeah, it gets killed. And victory is snatched from the grasp of Cayman the Vampire and Malachi the Fabulous. At the very end here, there was some bantering back and forth between the vampire and the necromancer, and my vampire has never been a fan of the wizardry arts, and neither does he have much trust for spellcasters, so he was putting a lot of the blame on the necromancer, but to be honest, I think they both kind of underperformed in this one, and surprisingly, it was the undead's infantry and corps that did most of the heavy lifting this battle, as well as the Black Knights, actually. Even though they weren't able to get a wound on the Hippogriff, they did manage to kill 4 or 5 of the Grail Knights before they went out. And I forgot to mention it, but their white on the skeletal steed, he was attached to that unit as well, and he managed to sneak a wound in one of those wounds on the Grail Knights. So, not too bad, but for a 500-point unit, I don't know if they carried their weight in this game either. You could say I didn't have the best planning for their positioning, and that was more my fault than the units. I also took the Drakenhof banner, expecting to get shot at a lot more, but the trebuchet was, unfortunately for me, well, fortunate, I guess, but it was already gone by the time my knight showed up. And I was kind of worried about getting a rock dropped on my really expensive unit, and I wanted that regen save for it, so yeah, that was kind of a waste. I think if I had the Banner of Barrows, I actually could have came out on top in that combat, so that was a big lesson learned for me. That Drakenhof banner might not be the always go-to banner for vampire counts. Oh, something else I want to mention. I know the battle report's kind of already over here, but we did do that last round of combat out between the Foot Knights and the zombies. With the charge, Furious Charge, getting an extra attack. Somehow they only killed 1 zombie. I think he just rolled really good on the regen saves more than anything. But yeah, the zombies kill a Foot Knight. Very underwhelming game for them. However, they were tanky enough and held the line when we needed them to most. Something I'm normally relying on the Man-at-Arms for, to be honest with you, but they just could not hold against the power of that vampire count. That was way too high grade an opponent for them to handle, which makes sense. It's a lot of attacks. It's just so funny that they crumbled to that entirely, and then when the vampire charged into the Foot Knights, he couldn't do a single thing to them somehow. So continuing on with my thoughts on the post-game here, I don't have a whole lot to say on the Bretonnian side of things. I really think my opponent actually played it pretty well with like the scenario and the list that I made for him. The vampire counts is more where my thoughts lie, and I learned a lesson in my prior battle against, I think it was the Chaos Dwarves. I didn't do a battle report on this, I only did like a little YouTube post on it. But in that game, I learned how slow your army really is, and you need to hustle across that board. And I think I did that pretty well this game. But in my hustling across the board, I was too hasty in setting up my zombies for that initial charge and not leaving enough space for the Black Knights to move in there. I needed to shift that whole line towards the opposite side of the board, where the Grail Knights and the Bretonnian Lord and the archers kind of were positioned. I didn't want to go that way because I was going to get shot at by longbows the whole time, but it was better that those units got shot and did their purpose and created opportunities for the Black Knights, I think, later on in the battle. And maybe not, I don't know. I mean, the Vampire Lord did do good initially, chewing up that whole man-at-arms unit. He should have done a lot more, but I wasn't really disappointed with his performance there. But I think I could have used him for what I used the Black Knights for, and he might have been even more effective at it, and that's protecting the Black Coach and making sure my objective makes it to that Grail Chapel. And yeah, he can fly around and stuff too. He could be doing breath weapon attacks with the dragon on nearby Bretonnian units if like I happen to create that opportunity for myself. Like, so he's not just not doing anything. He even has the invocation ability, which he can do still. So yeah, I think I made just quite a few little misplays during this game. I had the Banshee on the wrong side. Not to say the Grail Knights weren't a good target for her, but I needed my Necromancer there casting that Spirit Leech spell on them to give them -2 leadership. So that way I could have done really nasty damage to them when I rolled a 10 on the Scream effect. It would have gotten 3 of them instead of just 1. So again, just little lessons I kind of learned playing my vampire counts here. You really got to play them well, and not to say I haven't been having good success with them in the old world, but it's definitely feeling like one of the harder armies to play. I've tried the Bretonnians quite a few times. I tried Warriors of Chaos. I've tried Chaos Dwarves. And I think that's about it so far. But yeah, the vampire counts out of those 3 other armies kind of feel like the hardest one to play, if I'm being really honest here. Another part of that is because I'm very insistent on running a like kitted out old school Blood Dragon Lord flying around that's taking up a huge chunk of my army, and I don't think that's what they really want nowadays from the army. Same with like my big Black Knight unit that I have charging across the battlefield. I don't think the game really wants that these days. I think it wants you to have lots of little necromancers and a master necromancer supporting your army and just making sure you can tar pit whatever unit you want, and you can replenish the units that need it with invocations. So yeah, I might need to kind of expand my horizons with the undead here and accept that the blood dragons might not function as well as I want them to, and if they are going to function, they're going to need a little bit more caster support. Something else I'd like to bring up with my little YouTube community here is if any of you have thoughts on man-at-arms in the game. We've been discussing it amongst our little play group here as of late. Do they feel like they're kind of overpowered for the price that they cost? A lot of people have been kind of discussing it. I lean towards the side that it's way too early in the game to be jumping to conclusions like this. I haven't even seen goblins on the field yet. I haven't seen beastmen take like a proper size like gore horde or anything like that, or ungore horde, whatever it is. I always get confused on that one. But yeah, I think a lot of armies just kind of have like cheaper infantry units that they can take in mass numbers. And again, it just feels really early to be jumping to the conclusion that Bretonnians kind of have the best unit in that category of like cheap trash throwaway units that can be taken in large numbers. There are a lot of special rules for them, and They didn't really do that good in this battle, so this might not be the best time to bring it up as an example, but if you've been watching any of my other battle reports on the old world so far, I've taken them in most of my lists, and they have done pretty well. So, I don't know, it's something to think about, and I am definitely going to be kind of thinking about in the back of my mind whenever I'm running them in my Bretonnian lists. Again, I know this game wasn't the best example. I don't think my opponent did anything wrong with the positioning and stuff of them. It's just they went up against like a 400 or 500 point vampire lord, and he just obliterated the unit. And that's probably what's going to happen most of the time if there's like 20 man-at-arms. And I don't think the sergeant-at-arms is going to save him in that unit. So, yeah, just something I wanted to bring up to you guys. Let me know what your thoughts are. I've seen a couple of other YouTube videos discussing the topic, and I've listened to their points. I think some of them are pretty valid. You do get a lot of bang for buck. They're only like 4 points a pop. You got the special polearm rule. They're really hard to break because they have like shield wall. A lot of times they'll have the triptych for stubborn. You can take like 2 champions and yada yada yada. I don't want to carry on here for like 10 minutes talking about it, but yeah, just something I am curious if any of you have thoughts on. Also, let me know if anything seemed incorrect during the game in the comments below, how you feel about this custom scenario, or any of the armies and minis present. Just want to say it again, I do apologize with my narrations here. I know quite a few times I'm referring to myself controlling like this, the vampires or the Bretonnians, and they are both technically my armies, but again, I just wasn't really used to narrating a battle where all the armies present on the screen are all owned by me, and I also just helped quite a bit with building the list for the Bretonnian side of things, and I wasn't like guiding their hand or anything like that, but you know, I was offering a little bit of tactical advice and stuff. My opponent literally has only played against this army a couple of times in the old world, and we've played quite a few 8th edition games against each other, but never played Bretonnians before, and was kind of just looking for something fun to do outside of running their typical army. But that's going to be about everything for this battle report. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to reading your comments on it. Have a great day. See you all in the next one. Bye-bye.